The creation of Israel is one of the 21st century's or the 20th century's grossest acts, because it's been responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of people and the theft of their land, and it's still going on, and the West says and does nothing. Normally, when we have an apartheid regime like South Africa, there's eventually a galvanization of the establishment to say, look, you'll have to behave yourselves. It's got a bit out of hand, because Barclays were the main supporters of the apartheid regime in South Africa. British Bank, and the British establishment owned huge tracts of land. So, but it became politically intolerable. They were told to get your act in order. We can't carry on supporting this apartheid regime anymore. It's becoming too unpopular. And that's what happened. So that the British allowed them to release Mandela and create a democratic state. But the creation of the wealth of Judaism or Zionism is based upon the fact that usury was demonized by Christianity, which included Catholicism and Orthodox Christianity, and also Islam. The Islamic religion and all the Western religions demonize usury because Jesus Christ apparently had said, it's wrong to charge interest on the money you lend. And the Islamic Bank still don't charge interest on the money they lend, which is why they won't allow Islamic banking to exist over here, because it would destroy our banking system. 200 or 300 years, which is why the Rothschilds and people like that are so fabulously rich, is because Judaism permitted usury. And the sloth-like ruling classes of this country thought, well, this is a way I'll never have to work. If I invest my money, I earn money from my money, which is that had not happened hitherto. But Judaism allowed it, which is why Jewish bankers became fabulously rich and have still got a huge ground base. That created the dynasties, the Rothschilds and the banking dynasties that exist. And Lord Balfour, who was a Jewish English lord, landed gentry, decided that we ought to have a home for the Jewish people. Madagascar was looked at. We nearly did it, because after the Versailles Treaty in 1919, we owned Palestine. We owned Madagascar. We owned most of the assets that had been owned by the German or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the allies of the Germans, or the Ottoman Empire, which was also collapsed in 1918. They all collapsed together, and we were the main inheritors of those decimated colonial powers. And we decided to give a home to the Jewish people, who were fabulously rich, and I've explained how they got that wealth. So Balfour's recommendation then shipped to this newly acquired, because Balfour's declaration was, I think, 1917. The Versailles Treaty of 1919 created all this extra land, which we were given ownership of because of the collapse of the colonial powers. And we decided to eventually give Palestine to the Jewish race. And it wasn't really taken that seriously during the 20s and 30s. Everyone said, yeah, all right, eventually we'll get round to it, And then in 1945, when the Allies won, in inverted commas, or the Russians won, the poverty-stricken hordes of Jewish people that survived the gas chambers all wanted to go to the States. Millions of them said, let's get out of Europe, it's anti-Semitic, we want to go to the States. The States said, Jewish establishment in America said, look, we don't want these poverty-stricken people. It'll dilute our privileged position in this society. Let's put them somewhere else. So they put their money behind the creation of the State of Israel. So that's ostensibly the reason for the establishment of the State of Israel. Now, the genocide that they conducted on the indigenous population of that country is breathtaking. Not only the slaughter, they evicted millions and still haven't allowed them back in again. These still stateless people, and the whole thing is iniquitous. But it's the money that has allowed it to exist for this long. All the wars have been helped by America. See, because the Federal Reserve in America is privately owned. One would assume that it's state-owned bank, but it's privately owned by the big money people, the Rothschilds, the big people. They own the Federal Reserve, which lends money to the American government. They call the tunes. They call the tune of what the American government is going to do. That's essentially where we are with this lot. And but obviously Western religions realise that, hey, look, we'll have to charge usury. We'll have to permit usury in our religion because religion is a very fluid thing. You know, in order to maintain that level of commitment by the peasants, they need to change their doctrine every now and again when a piece of new evidence comes up that doesn't fit in with the Bible, like the 4,000-year-old history of the Earth had to be changed when Darwin came up with his theories that these fossils you find aren't monsters that died a few thousand years ago. These are seriously old fossils. Anyway, so that all changed, and that's exactly how it works. And religion is a fluid indoctrination of keeping people in positions of subservience, essentially. That's what its origins of it, which is controversial, and I get in a lot of trouble by making those statements. But you know, you can't see any evidence to the contrary. If there was a minutest piece of evidence to back up this absurd story, I'd grasp it. But you know, the Egyptians never had slaves, so how do you justify the tribes of Israel leaving Egypt to get out of slavery? There's no record of Egyptians ever having slaves. And how did someone part a sea to get a whole race of people through and then let it all flood over again? These facts, I'm told that I need faith, but having faith in something that's clearly illogical doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, but the creation of Israel is a very important factor as a haven for the money. That all the money that's used for the Federal Reserve comes from Israel or Switzerland, where you've also got is a tax haven. You know, it's no coincidence that Hitler didn't go near Switzerland. He went all round it, you know, but he respected Switzerland, didn't touch Switzerland. You know, even in every other neutral country that said, look, hey, we're neutral, leave us alone, he didn't give a fuck. But Switzerland, and why? Because they got a lot of money. Anyway, so that's a program that needs to be made. We need to tell a history of the creation of the State of Israel and why it was done. It's going to be seriously controversial, and all the stuff I've done, I did an exploration into the death of Yitzhak Rabin, who was killed by a nutter. You know, it's the lone nutter who is always a scapegoat. Whenever you get something that the state wants to cover up, they'll always say it was the lone nutter who couldn't speak English or didn't speak the language. And it's the same with Yitzhak Rabin's assassination. He was a zealous Zionist who was discontent with the peace process, and it just goes on and on. But it's a very interesting story, and it should be told, and it's very relevant, very relevant. You know, it's totally ignoring all the United Nations mandates since the creation of the state. But anyway, but it's a program that has to be made and will be made one day.